Hello, and welcome to our web conference titled IDC FutureScape, Worldwide National Government 2019 Predictions. In case you haven't joined us before, let me take a minute to introduce ourselves. IDC is the premier global provider of market intelligence, advisory services, and events for the information technology industry, with over 1,100 analysts in over 110 countries worldwide. IDC is a wholly owned subsidiary of IDG, the world's leading technology, media, research, and events company. Now I'm going to review a few logistics. You can download today's slides to save to your computer using the Attachments tab in the event console. Next, it is important to know that volume for this web conference is controlled through your computer. For a full list of upcoming IDC FutureScapes, we encourage you to visit the link you see here, and it is also in your Attachments tab. Finally, any questions that you have, please send them to insights@idc.com. Our speakers today are Sean McCarthy, Research Director, and Adelaide O'Brien, also Research Director for IDC Government Insights. It is now my pleasure to turn the presentation over to them.
Thank you very much, Shannon. And I think one of the first things we want to do is talk about the FutureScape itself. It's a larger document that can be downloaded from IDC.com, but within that document, we do cover 10 different predictions, and these are listed on the side. So I do want to go through them very quickly. And if you look at the the graphic over at the left side of the page, you can see a series of bubbles, and we try to place each one of these predictions on the bubble. The timing, like now or almost now, 2019 through 2024, where they would fall along that grid, and kind of the costs and complexity to address. Some of them are a little higher, a little more difficult to tackle than others. When you think of this, so most of these are discussed in terms of percentage. So like number one here, by 2022, 65% of national governments will have, we believe, meaningful open data platforms for at least one sector of the government or its economy, allowing for service improvements, innovation, transparency, etc. So by 2022, 65%, you can kind of draw your own parallel that things will be ramping up by that time. So if you were to move your button a little farther to the left, a little farther to the right, the percentage would change. But this is kind of where we see things reaching a certain critical mass, or in some cases just having a significant beachhead, saying this is where we think this particular set of solutions, this particular trend, et cetera, is going to start having an impact. Number two, cognitive computing will be deployed by 60% of national governments by 2023 for data center management, service and information accuracy, improved constituent interactions, cutting of fraud and abuse. As you all probably know, AI is having a huge impact on many things, from the device you talk to in your home to ways that you interact with computers online, and government certainly is taking advantage of this too, and finding different ways to leverage cognitive, whether it's managing the data center or really improving the way government interacts with constituents. Number three, to prevent AI-related privacy and ethical crises, by 2021, 50% of democratic governments will develop and deploy policies to prevent algorithmic biases and unethical data use. There's a lot to kind of untangle there, because some people don't even realize how much bias can be ingrained into things. Adelaide will talk a little bit more about that later in this presentation. Number four, cryptocurrencies will become the go-to currency for illegal activities. By 2020, 20% of national governments will set up task forces to combat money laundering enabled by blockchain. Already online, we've seen places where cryptocurrencies can be used to pay for everything from illegal drugs to human trafficking, porn sites. There's a lot that government usually is able to track by following the money, and cryptocurrencies certainly make it a little more difficult to follow the money these days, and governments are finding ways to deal with that. Rapidly scaling computer power, number five, holds big opportunity and threats. Entity analytics hands power to both good and bad actors, and we think that by 2022, quantum computing will threaten highly targeted, maybe the blockchains themselves. That's a huge discussion about whether the power will be ready by that time, but if it is, in theory, quantum can be used to target some of the huge numbers of transactions that happen on blockchains. Not something that's going to be a big problem immediately. As you can see, it's less than 1%, but it is something that's going to start happening, we believe, about that time, and we need to keep an eye on it. Number 6, strategic misrepresentation of news and events is a global government challenge. By 2020, 40% of governments will encourage bipartisan groups to isolate fake news and encourage metadata to help track news sources. Number 7, by 2022, 50% of national governments will deploy industry practices like technology business management to quantify acquisitions, transitioning from purchasing hardware to focusing more on software outcomes, et cetera. All industries are doing this. Government is certainly involved with that too. Number 8, by 2023, to enable timely decision-making, 55% of national governments will deploy edge intelligence and platform for initial data processing of Internet of Things, traffic on the network, and other devices at the point of action. Number 9, blockchain has great potential to confirm voter accuracy, but broad acceptance is challenging. So by 2020, we believe 15% of states will be running some sort of blockchain pilot program for voting. Some of those will have them in place, but at least a lot will be piloting the experiments by that time. And we think that it will be generally adopted, and it will expand by about 5% each year after that. By 2022, 60% of national governments will shore up legacy industrial control systems to protect critical infrastructure, such as dams, transportation systems, nuclear power plants, et cetera, from cyber attacks. So lots going on in government. And I do want to jump off to the next slide, where Adelaide will talk a little bit about the drivers we considered as part of this project.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, so much. So the global team of government insights analysts that created the predictions that Sean just highlighted selected these 7 drivers to create our 2019 national government predictions. And I'm going to give you just a brief summary of each one of these drivers. So cybersecurity, that includes theft, cyber attack, negligence, and create a crisis of digital trust. So, globally we're seeing people losing faith in technology as consumers and constituents, and this is creating a crisis of digital trust. And you're seeing poor technology decisions, human error, or unidentified weaknesses. And these are all resulting in breaches that have a significant impact on businesses, on customers, and on constituents. So we're also seeing new approaches such as security as a service and threat intelligence, and they're starting to prove themselves. And we're also seeing some promising new technologies such as blockchain create this trusted transfer of value from smart, secure contracts to include traceability. And Sean will cover our prediction regarding blockchain shortly. So the second driver, global information instability, political, social, and economic disturbance. So, when you think of the past few years, we've really been witness to unprecedented impacts of information. Social media has made it possible for anyone to create and disseminate ideas, true or not, to millions of people. And we've also seen automated bots spread targeted misinformation to achieve social engineering. And, while AI shows promise in filtering out the noise, there's little control or trust in whoever is managing those filters. So from skepticism about fake news to compromised personal data, people and organizations are working overtime in choosing how, where, when, and with whom to interact online. And, this backlash is really forcing government to look for ways such as GDPR to address privacy issues and to curate information flows. So Sean will also cover a prediction regarding misrepresentation of the news and governmental action that's required. The emerging autonomy, learning to live with AI. So intelligent applications based on artificial intelligence and continual deep learning are the next wave of technology, transforming how national governments learn, how they work, and how they interact with constituents. And IDC believes that there will be a long period of what we call augmented humanity. And by that we mean the fusion of digital technology and humans. And this will provide all kinds of improved mobility, sensing, and cognition. And this will will actually happen before autonomy takes over. But an issue we see is that the ethics of AI have yet to catch up with the technology, leaving the potential for misuse of AI. And we are seeing tools, however, that detect bias in AI, and they're starting to get attention. And we actually have a prediction on this, and I'll cover that shortly. The next driver is the next chapter of digital transformation. And here we're talking about technology-driven transformation, altering business and society. So when we think of digital transformation, we're thinking of the continuous process by which agencies adapt or drive disruptive changes in their operations and how they change to better serve constituents and ecosystem partners. But many agencies are implementing digital transformation without success. We've actually seen some early attempts that are being met by subsequent challenges, such as change management, budget, talent, platforms, scale, and sustainability. So in the next chapter of digital transformation, agencies really must adapt to new technologies, new ecosystems, and new ways of implementing their mission. The fifth driver, rising customer expectations, more convenience, customization, and control. And you know, we're all customers, and we all have more choices than ever. We see new devices, interfaces, wearables, AR, VR, some of us have home automation, and information and connectivity are combining to really instill a belief that people can have what they want, when, where, and how they want it, and oh, by the way, at the same time, be in control of the data and their experience. So what we're seeing is these expectations of consumers are bleeding over into their interactions with government. And previously accepted levels of customer service are just no longer good enough. So new platforms in business, operational and organizational models are required to meet constituent expectations and provide real-time support with answers to very complex questions ready at basically the click of a button. So I'll cover a prediction about open data that's impacted by this particular driver. The sixth driver, sense, compute, and actuate, turning data into value. You know, today, data and intelligence represent a unique opportunity for creating unimaginable value. And when we think of IoT and mobile devices and big data, and combining that with historical data, systems of records, and global information, you know, agencies are now able to make sense of the environment and put it into new context. So if you combine this with AI and machine learning, organizations are spreading intelligence from the edge to the core and then turning data into value. So some examples that come to mind include military operations and training and even equipment maintenance, national security operations, improved treatment for such things as combat wounds, and even the ability to analyze patent and trademark applications for similarities using machine learning. And our last and seventh driver is the race to innovate. Speed of change, delivery, and operations, and this is what separates thrivers and survivors. So today, the ability to change, to move quickly, to adapt, to seize opportunities, and be agile is the key for efficient mission delivery. And in an attempt to go faster, we are seeing many organizations struggle under a legacy of silos with redundancy and inconsistency. Some organizations will adapt to the new models and ecosystems and move from automation to autonomy, and others will struggle. They're going to struggle with some of the basics in the legacy systems and actually fall behind. So these are the 7 drivers that impacted our predictions, and I'll now turn this over to you, Sean, to tee up the 4 predictions that we're covering today. Sean, you might be on mute.
So these are the ones that sorry about that, you are correct. These are the 4 that we selected to highlight today. Prediction 1, Prediction 3, Prediction 6, and Prediction 9. Since we covered these already, I just want you to kind of take a look at these. And keep in mind, too, that this presentation is part of a larger document that goes into great detail on all 10 of these. But to get started for Prediction 1, that's actually Adelaide covering it. So I will hand it back to her, and I will be back for Prediction 6 and Prediction 9.
Thanks, Sean. So let's go ahead and take a look at prediction number one. So prediction number one, by 2022, 65% of national governments will have meaningful open data platforms for at least one sector of government or its economy, allowing for service improvement, innovation, and transparency. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this before I get to the IT impact and the guidance. And as I'm talking about it, you can see, as Sean pointed out, our figure over on the right-hand side. You can see prediction number one. With the number one, it's highlighted in dark blue, and it's about open data. So, you know, we all know that public bodies produce and commission significant quantities of data and information, and government perhaps creates one of the most data, right? So policies around open data promote transparency, accountability, and value creation, and it's important that these policies make government data available to all. So when we think of open data in a government context, it means sharing the data that's collected, using it for operations, using it for planning, legislative development, and policy development across multiple topics. And the other thing that we're seeing is national governments, they also publish information about industry-specific activities that it collects, and it provides insights on it, and this can help the economy, it can help employment, it can help trade relations, and it can also impact national policies and programs. So I just want to mention there's a few open data policies that we've observed as we look at national governments globally. And that's ensure that the data is free for users, ensure that it's easily findable, that it's placed in a location intended to be permanent, make sure that the data is trusted, and that means digitally signed or includes the publication, the creation date, the authenticity, and the integrity of the data, include documentation about the format, the relevance, and the context of data, so don't just push raw data out there, and also provide data in formats that do not include executable content and thus would be considered safe to open. So as we think about this globally, we know national governments are at various stages and levels of commitment in providing open data. And for example, in the United States, we have data.gov, and it has over a dozen industry categories of data, including such categories as it has education, energy, science, and research, and public safety. And for example, in public safety, data.gov provides crime mapping and alert website. And this is similar to news agency, but all it covers is crime mapping. So constituents can see what's happening in their neighborhood. And data.gov also has an app that helps search and discover restaurants, churches, schools, hospitals, hotels, even convenience stores and supermarkets. And it not only helps find those, but it also meshes that with information about their health inspections. So that's really important. So I think if you think about these examples, they're showing that from the citizen perspective, open data is a necessity, and it's an element that's very important to help citizens improve their civic life. And we're seeing, in addition to what I talked about in the United States, there's other nations are also committing to open data. We see Australia, UK, and France, and they've really been recognized as leaders in national open data platforms. So now let's take a look at what, as we think about this, what we're advising on the IT impact of this. So open data means all appropriate data is available for all. So significant capacity, and this is typically you're going to need to put this in the cloud, will be required to host an ever-growing number of data sets. We also know that open data platforms typically provide software solutions that include content applications. That's very important, such things as content management, data management, publishing software, as well as access to the data so that folks can do analysis and query on the data, as well as data visualization capabilities. And then the third impact, and this is significant, the staff of the national agencies preparing data for the open data platform, even if it's an automated process in your country, they require training on formatting data and ensuring consistent language and nomenclature, and that the data is an acceptable machine-readable format. So if we take a look then at our guidance to our national government clients here, we believe it's critical that the data is accurate, and we're advising you to ensure that the data is safe from manipulation, So obviously, this is robust cybersecurity has got to be in place to protect that data. We also believe that technical standards and guidelines should be updated every 2 years to ensure they're sufficiently up to date and to ensure continuity over time and commitment across government departments and agencies. You know, you really need the commitment of all levels of government, including the executive level leadership and directions. Okay, so I'm going to go now to the next prediction number 3. And this is about preventing AI-related privacy and ethical crisis. And we're predicting that by 2021, 50% of democratic governments will develop and deploy policies to prevent algorithmic bias and unethical data use. So let me again just talk a little bit about this before I get to the IT impact and the guidance. And you know, what we're seeing is that AI proliferates and is deployed for mission critical and everyday government operations. You know, it's going to start to make or assist in decisions that are going to have significant impact. And this is going to affect almost every aspect of individuals' lives. And at the same time, there's technical challenges in machine learning, and this can result in errors, such as false positives, and this can actually start to trigger automated actions or other events. And AI can have embedded algorithmic or data bias in sensitive areas. And this is in particular regarding gender, race, class, or age. So, and we also know that humans have a level of bias, and this impacts our everyday decisions. And since machine learning is trained by humans, these biases may be inherently and inadvertently built into machine-based AI systems. And the other point is machines can also entrench bias if the learning is based on limited demographic information, a limited benchmark data set, or a preponderance of historical data that just really doesn't reflect today's reality. So when we think about responsible and ethical AI, it includes protecting individuals from harm based on a data bias or unintended correlation of personally identifiable information, and that can happen even when using anonymous data. So to mitigate bias, we're seeing democratic governments will be committed to training their AI platform and use training data that's as comprehensive and unbiased as possible. Now, IDC believes that very different policies will be developed by national governments depending on their political structure. So democratic governments, they're going to respond to significant pressure from citizens and civic-minded organizations, and they're starting now to work to monitor AI. And on the other hand, non-democratic and more centrally controlled nations are typically more concerned with public safety and less concerned with privacy issues. So these governments will rely on AI software such as facial recognition as a form of social control. So let's get to the IT impact of this prediction. So impact, what we're advising CIOs, you really need to establish a process to ensure that your AI solutions are responsible and ethical. And we recommend using training data that's comprehensive and diverse, and verify the veracity and lineage of the data prior to training the model. We also believe CIOs need to ensure transparency about how AI decisions are made. And this is so key when data privacy is at stake. And then also AI techniques should be fully explainable to inform not only decision makers, it's very, very important, but you really need to help address constituents' concerns. You know, and we're asking and suggesting that CIOs ensure that access to responsible agency individuals is easily available for redress, and that there's a clear plan for addressing errors in any real or perceived privacy concerns. So let's take a look at the guidance then. If we look at that, we believe that human oversight is so critical in deploying AI. So our guidance is to create a governance process for senior leaders and periodically review this whole AI recommendations, decisions, and even subject them to formal performance reviews, just like their human counterparts. And as agencies use machine learning to mine and analyze synthetic data and dark data, CIOs must develop policies that prevent drilling for individual data patterns, and the concern is that it would disclose PII or profiling that actually would reveal individual information. And then this last one is so important. We're advising our government clients to really seek industry partners that have responsible and ethical policies governing the use of AI, and those that have developed tools and techniques that actually test for and detect unintended consequences, such as gender, racial, and ethnic bias in AI software. So stay tuned to this emerging market of technologies that test for AI bias. As you know, this is a quickly growing market, and we at IDC will cover the vendors who are providing those technologies and tools to test for bias. So Sean, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
All righty. Thank you, Adelaide. So prediction, let me hit this button here. Prediction 6. Well, let's talk false news here, and this is the time for it. We have midterm elections coming up, etc. Strategic misrepresentation of news and events is a global government challenge. There are foreign players in this that are making sure that it not only happens in the U.S., but many other countries. False news is fed into systems, and a lot of time it is governments that are called upon to either confirm a claim or to prove that a claim is not true, or to at least be able to show some of the data that they have that could kind of tilt the balance about whether a news story is true or not. By 2020, 40% of governments will encourage bipartisan groups, and I think that's the very important part, the bipartisan groups, to isolate fake news and encourage metadata for news sources and to find ways that they can kind of come forward and participate a little bit to make it happen. So basically, governments are under pressure to kind of prove these claims through legal records sometimes. In other words, if somebody is making a claim about what government did or how it was done or who it may have favored, there should be a record of some of that in government, and government has to be able to search and be able to prove certain claims through legal records as quickly as possible. And obviously that may mean that IT departments need to invest in upgraded, business analytics, search tools, file systems that they can, quickly access and say, hey, here's a record from 5 years ago that proves or disproves a claim made by somebody in the media. So ID departments are going to increasingly become a part of this kind of chain of custody to prove what the data says. Artificial intelligence has potential too, if proper algorithms can be developed, and certainly there's many people working on that right now, to recognize certain types of fake news based on origin, based on the factual cross-checking that can be done through other news sources, social media manipulation, things like that. Already, government has placed pressure on organizations like Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, saying, hey, look, you are not doing enough to enforce these, rules that may help limit false news. So the government has a couple of different hats to wear here. One is to put pressure on external forces to start trying to promote the truth and de-emphasize the false news, and the other is to be part of that conversation and provide data where possible. So guidance-wise, what we tell some of our government clients is, be transparent. You must show more details on how data is available, how it's shared, rather than less. And, we see that waxing and waning year to year. Sometimes certain years' budget information is much more readily available to me as a budget analyst than it is other years, simply because of the way the government, met its deadlines and published information about where money is going. So again, we really stress, make it as transparent as possible, make it as searchable as possible, make the data feeds available to third parties, track details. IT obviously can help identify news origins. And when people are showing things, sharing things on even government networks, sometimes social media, there should be a place that they can go and look to see, from a metadata standpoint, where certain claims, where certain data and information is coming from. And education has a role to play here too. Universities and K through 12 schools can kind of help highlight how to tell what's fake and what's not fake. Show students key examples of fake news, poorly sourced data. And I think that is one of the key things is if there isn't a decent source given for some claim that's being made, students, all citizens, should be able to recognize that quickly, but it does take a certain amount of training. And then the next prediction 9, our last one that we're going to cover, blockchain. Blockchain has great potential to confirm voting accuracy. In fact, blockchain-based voting systems are in development and actually deployed in a few places around the world right now. Broad acceptance is challenging. Sometimes there's a lack of understanding about the technology, a lack of trust about it. A lot of people don't understand blockchain and how everything has to point back to the original transaction and show that its work has been completed and that all work is tied to that original block, that Genesis block. So we believe by 2020, 15% of states will be running some sort of blockchain voting pilot at least, and that most of those will be successful, we believe, and adoption will be expanding slowly, maybe 5% each year after that. And for fun on this particular one, I decided to change, and rather than using the bubble chart, show a flow chart. So basically, this is one of a handful of different ways that we've seen for voters to get involved and participate in blockchain voting. The voter submits credentials that are approved by an e-voting system. The voter then downloads the voting software or signs onto a secure website. And from there, there still has to be an authorization. So the voter submits documentation the same way they would if they went in and registered to vote in person. You have to submit documentation about who you are, where you live, how you can vote in a certain precinct, and that still needs to be submitted, but it can be submitted online and eventually receives 2 different authorizations for participation. One is the ID that they submitted is validated as appropriate by a validation authority. And number 2, the voter registrar confirms that the individual is now qualified and registered to vote and able to participate using the blockchain voting solution. So once you enable the blockchain, think of it as like a container that would be on your computer or on your cell phone or whatever. You enter that container, virtual, obviously. That's where you cast your ballot. The choices are represented as blocks. The block goes back to the the blockchain-enabled voting network for validation. Distributed network, if it's in use, because there's a couple different ways of doing blockchain. Distributed network is the most common. Confirms the ballot is valid, and the verified block is added to the chain. Now, there are people out there who are in the business of always raising doubt about anything, and you see it on both sides of the political spectrum. So options is that the voter maybe also receives a digital or paper-based confirmation, and those things are capable of being audited later if necessary if somebody claims that the blockchain-enabled vote is somehow hacked, which is not impossible but highly unlikely given the complexity and the background math, et cetera, that needs to be done in blockchain. So having this auditable trail that exists in other ways outside of the blockchain is important too. So from an IT impact standpoint, governments who have tested it, there have been some in Europe, they expect to expand it. They're happy with what they've seen so far. Leading practice involves downloading the app like we just talked about, registering, but these systems need to be fully standalone, capable of being audited, and all of these things, the IT department or the election officials in charge will need to have all this in the back of their mind as they move forward. So guidance-wise, have integrity, as all elections should. Elections must spark bipartisan concern. Broad support is key, and if it's blockchain-enabled, bipartisan support for the blockchain should be in place, along with an understanding of how an audit system will work if one is deemed to be needed. Show those auditable results. I may mean paper receipts like we talked about, and become familiar at the very least with this emerging voting method. It's going to grow in popularity, and that means both election officials, vote counters, the IT departments all need to learn more about blockchain-enabled voting. And that is it for right now. I think that's basically the last of our presentations, and we will jump off from there to just kind of our last page, which talks about Meet the Analysts. And my name is on there. Ruthie's is on there. And as you can see, we have a global team that focuses on government IT, and we are here to answer all your questions. And I think we are out of time at that point, so I think I'll end it there. So back to you, Shannon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean and Adelaide, and thank you all for joining us. This concludes our web conference. If there are any questions you'd like to ask, please send them to insights@idc.com. We also invite you to check out the additional IDC FutureScapes we offer in the attachments section of the web console. Thank you very much for your time.